Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, helping transform crowded, dated, or inefficient kitchens into more functional spaces for daily life. Details at callmosby.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Jonathan Ahl. A year has passed since an EF3 tornado hit St. Louis, damaging thousands of homes and killing multiple people. North St. Louis bore the brunt of the destruction. Since then, residents say frustratingly little progress has been made. Debris and damaged homes still line the streets of affected neighborhoods. Pat Miller experienced major damage to her home's back wall and roof. She had insurance, but it wouldn't cover enough to make her home livable. Her house deteriorated more with every rainfall. She says help still hasn't come from the city.
The city of St. Louis has their pants down. I don't know how they're going to pull them back up.
Today marks the first day of the St. Louis Public Radio series, Torn, the struggle to recover from the tornado, the flailing government response, and the fight for North St. Louis. Later in the hour, our reporters will share the results of their investigation, which found that inexperience and key decisions within the Spencer administration slowed recovery efforts. But first, we hear from St. Louis Mayor Cara Spencer, who spoke with STLPR senior environment and data reporter Kate Grumke on Friday. Julian Nix, who leads the city's recovery office, also joined the conversation.
Mayor, it's been a year since the tornado. How are you feeling as May 16th approaches?
Oh my gosh. It has been just shy of a year. And the feelings I have going into this anniversary, I couldn't put into words. They're so varied. They span the gamut. I still feel so much grief for the loss of so many residents, both physical, mental, and, obviously the loss of life. But I'm also very hopeful. I'm very proud of the work that our city did. I'm very proud of the work of so many organizations and people. I have so much hope and also so much grief. Of course, the work that we have ahead of us remains and is immense. And so, it's about putting one foot in front of the other every day and continuing to make progress.
We checked your office's website, and as of this morning, it says you've repaired 23 homes and demolished 69 when thousands need work. So, Mayor, I'm wondering, how do you justify how low those numbers are?
It's been so hard. The scale of this disaster was truly enormous. And as we ended up being this sort of guinea pig on the national stage for this brand new FEMA, and I shouldn't even say brand new FEMA, ever-changing FEMA, juggling all that, ramping up existing programs, building new programs has been painstakingly slow, and understanding where the federal government, where the state was going to be able to come in with those larger pots of money and be able to help us. And as Julian said, it has been enormously slow. Our city has historically been slow at a lot of things, but we are now in a position where we've been able to shore up many of the city processes that were far too slow to begin with, and we've got the partnerships on the ground working that are ready to accelerate this work for year two, and as we go into weather that will be much more accommodating for doing that work.
And you've been talking about the federal government from early in the response to the tornado. 100 days after the tornado, you came on St. Louis on the Air and said that FEMA wasn't showing up how you hoped. Mm-hmm. Looking back, you waited for FEMA for a really long time, almost fruitlessly. Do you wish you had changed course or pivoted sooner?
Well, I wouldn't say it was fruitlessly. FEMA has provided almost $50 million of individual assistance to our residents. That's $50 million we wouldn't have had without FEMA. They've also provided public assistance, and through an enormous amount of work from our cost recovery and our recovery office, as well as our department heads, we have submitted tens of millions of dollars of public assistance. and we have so far had an enormously successful track record in getting those approved. And so we're on track to getting quite a bit of funding from FEMA, nowhere near where we hoped, you're right. And certainly in the hours, days following the tornado, the lack of FEMA presence on the ground was both heartbreaking and enormously challenging for our residents and our city to accommodate. But that being said, there have been some meaningful partnerships, and frankly, a city can't do this alone. And if we had pivoted, I have to try to do this without any assistance at the federal or state level, we would absolutely be worse off today. And so while we're not anywhere near where we want to be, where we should be, and where our residents deserve us to be, I know that we couldn't do this alone, and we're better off even with limited partnership with those partnerships.
And I wanted to ask you about condemned buildings because the public guides that FEMA has for public assistance say that they don't reimburse for demolishing condemned buildings. And I know that you all were briefed on that in June by the State Emergency Management Agency, although Julie and I didn't see your name on the sign-in sheet, so I'm not sure if you were there. But you all continued to ask about condemned buildings for months after that, after June, including in that letter in December. Why did you all think that they might make an exception or change their rules when you knew for so long that they typically don't?
Well, if I may speak to that, back in June, Julian came on to the mayor's staff in a what was going to be a temporary capacity as the interim deputy director of operations. And at that time, he was not yet our recovery office lead. But we did have members of our team at that meeting. And you're right, there have been, FEMA does have guidance that they don't typically often include demolition of condemned buildings. However, this was not a typical disaster. And when you look at the size and scale of this disaster, it is absolutely beyond normal scale. And we also know very clearly that FEMA has and often does provide those supports or additional supports for cities and for disasters for an undue burden. And we absolutely believe that because of the volume of buildings that were hit in the city of St. Louis that were previously condemned, this was an unprecedented burden. And so our guidance from our relationships with FEMA, and as well as the many, many disaster experts that we had embedded in our team at the time, was that historically FEMA would and should have approved the cost of demolition of those buildings. And so to fail to go after that funding would have been a huge missed opportunity for the city of St. Louis. Now, under this new FEMA, they did not end up approving those and provide that path for us. And you're right, that is enormously frustrating. But it is my firm belief to this day still that we should have received that, and that in other iterations of FEMA, we would have received those funds.
But in June, you saw that in the text, and you didn't end up demolishing those condemned buildings.
We were still
March.
going for those funds, and we should have, frankly. And I do believe under other circumstances and under other leadership of FEMA, we would have received that.
Is there an example of another city that you heard did get condemned buildings?
Yeah, I guess to add into here, Kate, one, I kind of want to say two things. We didn't wait to start taking down buildings until we had FEMA approval. We started taking down buildings immediately after the tornado in our broader process with the funds we had. The challenge was that it was slower, it was a slower process, and it was a massive amount of funds. So when we look, and we didn't have those exact numbers at the time, but we knew the lion's share of vacant buildings in the tornado zone, the majority of those that were red tagged were previously condemned. Now we have official results to say that's about 30% of the total buildings that likely need demolition were condemned. That's about 250 buildings. the city and the massive amount of resources it would have drained on the city to just do demolition, if that wasn't supported by the state or supported by FEMA, would have been a massive drain on resources that couldn't be used for repair, couldn't be used for rental assistance, couldn't be used for those things. And so when we were making the trade-off of putting condemned buildings in there, we knew it was a long shot, but we also know that the guidelines you were referring to are Papa G guidelines. Those are guidelines. The Stafford Act gives a lot of discretion to FEMA administrators to be able to choose and justify that when it's in the best interest and really necessary for the recovery of a city to be able to grant that. Did we think it would come? No. But for all of our residents, we knew that this is a massive disaster, and we had to advocate at every level for as much as we could
Well,
get.
we did think that. I did think we would get those funds. I mean, we had dozens and dozens of conversations with national experts, and the reality of your question is, why didn't we deploy the limited resources we have at some of those condemned buildings, recognizing, as Julian pointed out, that it was very possible, you're right, that we weren't going to get that funding. But from my perspective, those buildings, those condemned buildings, had been vacant and condemned for decades.
We've
in
heard from
advance.
residents who are neighbors to those buildings that say that they can't get started on work because they're worried that those buildings are going to
You're
come
right.
down on their homes.
So what we've done right now is we started, as Julian pointed out, on those emergency cases where they are next to buildings where they're occupied, but to deploy the very limited resources that we had on buildings that had been vacant for decades, and we possibly had a path to paying for them so we could do more demolitions in the long run, could have been extremely wasteful. And so where we were, we wanted to make sure that we were deploying the limited resources that we had in the way that was going to allow us to do the most good in the long run. But you're right, there are many instances where you have a building, whether it was condemned before the tornado or not, which is immediately adjacent to an occupied building, or one that would be occupied if the resident or homeowner could invest in it safely by taking the building down. And those are precisely the buildings that we're prioritizing taking down in this wave here.
And I want to talk about that early request to have the Army Corps do the debris removal. In August, we've learned that State Representative Colin Wellenkamp set up a special meeting for you to plead your case to have the Army Corps do that work. It was a meeting with Major General Kimberly Peoples, who oversees the Mississippi Valley Division of the Army Corps. And we've learned that you didn't take that meeting. Why didn't you?
Well, Kate, I think that's a mischaracterization of that meeting. I had absolutely dozens of meetings with the Army Corps of Engineers over the course of the last year. Many here in this office with their leadership. They were embedded in some of our decision making, but that meeting was more about rivers in general, and I'd be happy to share with you the details of that proposed meeting. And in fact, I think my focus was primarily on the tornado at that time, and so not taking that meeting was, even in retrospect, I believe the right thing to do. And I've talked to Representative Wellenkamp, and he's been a great partner. He's one of the representatives who have been on the ground meeting with community, not just talking about community, but really seeing what's been going on here. And I believe he shared with you the purpose of that meeting, and I don't believe that it was characterized in your words here in the way that he would characterize the meeting.
That's what I believe it to be. And it was on August 15th. On August 14th, I had reported that you were asking for the Army Corps to do this work. And they were here in St. Louis. Major General Peoples is a really top dog in the Army Corps. So you said you were talking to people in the Army Corps. Did you talk
Absolutely.
with Major General Peoples?
Absolutely. We had, I can't speak to that specific,
You met with Major General Peoples?
I'm not going to. I'm unable to speak on that specifically right now. But I can tell you that over the course of the last year, we had dozens of meetings, and we were really working with a whole host of leadership within the Army Corps. Your question about leaning on them is an important one, because the scale of debris removal and demolition was so immense. We knew that it far exceeded what our city had capacity to really hold, and certainly the expertise to be able to move forward. And so when you look at disasters like the tornado that hit Joplin, the Army Corps came in immediately and led that effort. And we knew and still know that the Army Corps has the capacity and the expertise to really run a program the size of what we needed here. And so
I was shocked to see in the letter where you're asking them to help that you said the timeline could have been that they would be finished by March. And we're sitting here in May with very little of that work done.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering why you would pass up any opportunity to meet with them to plead your case for them to do that work.
Again, that meeting was set up for a very different purpose, and I'm happy to share with you the purpose of that. And I would encourage you to talk to the representative who put that meeting together, because it was set up for a very different purpose than what you're describing. But that being said, as I mentioned, we just had dozens and dozens of meetings with the Army Corps, their leadership, SEMA, the state emergency management team, FEMA, a whole host of partners. It really was just an enormous number of conversations, pleadings for the Army Corps to get engaged in that level.
And we've heard of some other times where people offered to meet with you, to speak with you, and you didn't take it in the early days. One that was notable, a former FEMA administrator, Pete Gaynor, who was administrator under Trump's first term, emailed you his cell phone in June and offered to help, and he said you never called him. So why did you not talk to him?
I'm not able to speak to specific. I can't speak to that specifically. During the initial days of the tornado, you may know this, my email changed when I became mayor. And of course, I have staff that help deal with the absolute barrage of emails that any city mayor gets on a regular basis. And so I often don't, I'm not the recipient of all those, so I couldn't speak to specifics. But certainly, I was meeting around the clock. I don't think there were weeks I didn't sleep at all, just working consistently around the clock. And there are people and individuals sometimes that we weren't able to take meetings with, but we certainly did try to take everyone that we could. That one in particular, I couldn't speak to that specific email that may or may not come through my right email or not. I just can't speak to it.
And so you did actually respond. You said that you would call him, and then you didn't. So I know that you did receive the email. Can you tell us who was giving you advice? Who were the experts that you had telling you how to navigate this wild and, for the first time, you've been through a disaster?
Oh gosh, called on so many folks. Initially, you may know that. Any city, as FEMA is really shifting the burden of responding to major disasters onto cities, our city wasn't equipped with staff. You saw from the report about SEMA following the issue with the sirens that there was a cascade of failures within the city's emergency management team. And that was really unfortunate. So we brought in immediately some folks from Deployed Resources, which is a national disaster response firm. We brought in some experts from McKinsey and other consultant agencies who have a large amount of experience with disasters nationwide, and just a host of folks. We brought in consultants from Tetra Tech. We now have SLS and other consultancies, but we also had the state of Missouri's SEMA. The state of Missouri has more disasters than I think any state in the United States right now under FEMA. We, unfortunately, as a state, have a vast array of experience in disasters, and we had those folks embedded in our EOC for the first, essentially, 2 months of following the May 16th tornado.
That's St. Louis Mayor Cara Spencer and Chief Recovery and Neighborhood Transformation Officer Julian Nix. They spoke with STLPR Senior Environment and Data Reporter Kate Grumke on Friday. We need to take a quick break, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. And later in the hour, Kate will join me alongside Economic Development reporter Kayvon Mansouri to talk about their investigation into the city's tornado recovery effort. They looked into things like the meeting Missouri State Representative Colin Wellenkamp arranged between Mayor Spencer and Army Corps leaders, a meeting that Wellenkamp said did have tornado recovery on its agenda. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
Welcome back. I'm Jonathan Ahl. Let's return to STLPR reporter Kate Grumke's conversation with St. Louis Mayor Cara Spencer. Julian Nix, who leads the city's recovery office, also joined the discussion. That office was set up to address both short and long-term response to the EF3 tornado that tore a path of destruction in the city nearly 1 year ago. The three spoke last Friday at City Hall.
We've been reporting on that office's recovery, and we now know that, Julian, your team stood up a bunch of new programs like home repair and demolition. But we obtained emails that show in June the then director of the Community Development Agency, Noel Pfeffer, wrote you a really detailed memo laying out the existing city programs that could immediately be reworked to do those exact same things, home repair and demolition. So I want to know why you decided to spend months creating entirely new programs instead of adapting what the city already had.
Well, I think Mr. Pfeffer, for one thing, CDA was operating at a massively expanded capacity following ARPA, and that was enormously slow. When I came in, one of the first things before the tornado that I really focused on was the ARPA funds and how the city was woefully behind every other city in the nation in deploying those ARPA funds and getting them spent. And there was, of course, a timeline. And the overwhelming majority of those unspent funds were in CDA. In fact, the vast majority of funds we had awarded many years before to CDA were still unspent when I walked in the door. And so, the idea of putting more funds into a department that was clearly incapable of getting funds effectively out the door was something I was very, very skeptical of. Nonetheless, and I'll say as well, the home repair program that the city had in place was one, I have a lot of experience with as an alderperson. It was first in the building division, shifted over to CDA, and it was painfully slow to get out the door. Residents have been complaining for many, many, many years about the slowness of that program. And that program was set up really to do minor home repairs between $10,000 and $20,000. Often a little bit of tuck pointing, some roof repair, and maybe some front step work or stuff like that. Very, very different work than what we needed to see following the tornado, rebuilding roofs and major structural work. That being said, recognizing we did have a home repair program in place, we did allocate some funds to CDA, and unfortunately those funds didn't get out the door very quickly. And so we did have to pivot, and we recognized not only was the work just fundamentally different in its scope by being very, very structural and much bigger. We wanted to get it out the door much more quickly than Mr. Pfeffer was able to get those funds out the door.
Yeah, and I take your point that there are valid criticisms of that CDA home repair program, but at the end of the day, the proof is in the numbers. Their most recent year, they had repaired 500 homes. Julian, you're sitting at a year, 23 homes. That's a huge difference. So does that look like it was more successful than adapting that existing program?
Look, right now, as I mentioned, when Mr. Pfeffer left CDA, we were still sitting on over half of the ARPA funds in that department, and there was just not a feasible way to scale that in a way that there was a level of confidence. We did, at the end of the day, award funds. We did provide funds to that program, and they're still not deployed. And so at the end of the day, we really felt like we had to bring in partners to scale that program to make it move much more quickly.
I want to ask, too, about the structure of the recovery office. We know that McKinsey came and donated time to help set up that office. We saw that memo. I spoke with officials from St. Louis County, Brentwood, Richmond Heights, Clayton, and St. Louis Public Libraries, and all of them said they had previous experience with disaster recovery in FEMA, and it doesn't seem like that same experience was present in the recovery in St. Louis. So I want to understand why you created a new recovery team made up of people who hadn't worked on disaster response before.
Well, look, I mean, we brought in a lot of experts throughout, as I mentioned, some of those partners across the consultants that we've brought in to help us really bring in that expertise, which you're right, we needed. And I think the proof is in the numbers, so to speak, on the cost recovery. As I mentioned, the tens of millions of dollars that we've submitted, we have a 98% approval rating on those, and that really speaks to the work that we're doing on that regard. When I took office, I came into a system of badly. I would say that there was a lot to be desired in a lot of city government, and our emergency management team had enormous challenges, and there was experience there. Unfortunately, it was experience that didn't pan out, and as we saw from the report I mentioned earlier, had some serious holes in it, and we've worked to bring in some new leadership to that organization, and we're looking to expand the capabilities of that. But I firmly believe, as I have been advocating at East West Gateway, that emergency management should not be siloed into cities. We need a federal government that can and should be the response to disasters this size. And those jurisdictions that you mentioned, Kate, are significantly smaller than us, and the damages that they had following the tornado dwarf. In fact, if you add them all together, it's 1/10 of the damage that the city of St. Louis has.
And with such a simpler situation that they're dealing with, and in such a smaller city. Absolutely. Isn't it even more important for you all to have experience?
That's why we brought on so many experienced individuals, as I mentioned, Tetra Tech, SLS.
How early did those consultants come in? I know Tetra Tech, the contract was signed in September.
Well, we brought in deployed resources, I think it was Sunday, the Sunday after the tornado. So 48 hours later, we had folks with vast disaster experience embedded within our organization. We also brought in, as I mentioned, we had the state SEMA folks here on the ground embedded, dozens of folks. So to say we didn't have that experience within our organization is really missing the fundamental structure of disaster response in the weeks, hours, days, months following May 16th.
So you had it was within the consultants.
As I mentioned, we also had state SEMA, and they lent an enormous amount of expertise to the city of St. Louis for months, who were embedded in our organization, recognizing that not only did the city need that help, but no city was set up. And typically, historically, FEMA, as I've mentioned, has come in and run that response in the hours, days following the tornado, and that did not happen here.
And you've also said that now you feel like FEMA is showing up. You got 98% reimbursement. So could you kind of clarify for me what is your current feeling about how FEMA has interacted with the city?
Well, as I mentioned, I think we have gotten some significant support. Is it enough? Absolutely not. Is it the level of support that we needed and that other cities have seen? Absolutely not. Does it dwarf in comparison? Yes, it does. Is it more than nothing? Yes, it is. And so I'm not going to scoff at the, $50 million that our individuals received. Is it anywhere near what they need to be made whole? Absolutely not. But I wouldn't shun that. And those residents obviously deserve more, but they obviously deserve those funds as well. On the public assistance, it's tens of millions of dollars that the city of St. Louis wouldn't otherwise have, and we need those funds to be able to continue to do this work.
And I mentioned the former FEMA administrator that I spoke with, Pete Gaynor. He told me that cities, and especially mayors, have to be the squeaky wheel when it comes to FEMA. And I want to hear from you what that looked like on your end. Were you pushing and calling all the time to try to get those answers?
Oh, absolutely. As I mentioned, the state of Missouri is a state that has seen more disasters than almost any other state, certainly this in the last couple of years. And, my first call from the EOC was to Governor Mike Kehoe, who was on the ground by 9 a.m. the next morning, physically here with us, and partnering to make sure that we had those enormous numbers of state SEMA staff with that enormous, vast decades worth of disaster experience on the ground with us, helping us to drive what the EOC looked like, what our emergency team looked like, and what our response looked like. But we've also partnered with our federal delegation, both Senator Schmidt and Josh Hawley, who are also on the ground with us, and we know that it's those partnerships that are going to be most effective in getting the Community Development Block Grant disaster relief funds, as well as, they were instrumental in getting the federal, the FEMA declaration to begin with. And so, those partnerships, those conversations, those that pleading, if you will, was absolutely necessary to getting where we are.
And I want to make sure that I ask you about the CDBG DR funding. You mentioned the Community Development Block Grant funding from HUD. What has the city done to advocate for that funding, and why have we still not gotten it?
Oh, yeah, that's a question in part for our federal partners, but those are funds that they don't have a specific timeline. We've been, advised they can take anywhere from 1 to 2, sometimes even sometimes more years than that. We are hopeful that's not the case here. Unfortunately, this tornado hit us at a time where our nation hasn't seen many disasters of this kind, which has really hurt our efforts in bringing light to the newing FEMA orientation here. But we're hopeful that the congressional allocation that's required to put this together, the combination of what we're seeing in the fires in California, can open up that tranche that we need to be a part of.
And has St. Louis hired lobbyists to advocate for that in D.C.?
We do have lobbyists. We have had the same lobbyists for a long time. We're opening up that opportunity for some new lobbying here. I think that proposal will be live in public here soon. So this is a good opportunity for anybody out there that would like to be a part of our team on that front. Of course, we did lean into the longstanding lobbyists that the previous administration and many administrations have leaned into for many years. But we're also interested in seeing what other opportunities are out there.
One resident told us she's worried the May 16th tornado is going to be the next Mill Creek or Pruitt-Igoe, where a majority Black community is just wiped off of St. Louis's map. What are you going to do to make sure that doesn't happen?
St. Louis has such a long history of neglecting Black residents, and the conditions of the neighborhoods that were impacted by May 16th tornado are very obvious reminders of our city's legacy of neglecting many communities. And so I think, first and foremost, centering our work in retaining as many residents as we can. We were, I think that's why, standing up programs like rental assistance and making sure that we are deploying the home repair funds. We've making sure that in not only the funds that we've allocated so far, which have been close to $50 million of local city funds, deploying this and advocating for and deploying the $100 million from the state. But in the package that we're working with the Board of Aldermen to allocate, over $100 million of RAM settlement funds, specifically into North St. Louis, to not only support rebuilding homes, but to implement the plans that neighbors are building with PDA and our city partners to drive what our communities should look like. And so, we know that we don't have enough funds, even with the RAMs and everything, to make people whole and to make our communities that have experienced decades of disinvestment whole. But I do want it to be part of my legacy as mayor to do what we can to both repair those decades of disinvestment and to rebuild in a way that not only keeps our residents here, but welcomes back many who have chosen to leave.
And we've heard from residents who say they've lost hope in the city ever showing up for them. Mm-hmm. What do you say to that?
Well, we're going to keep showing up. And, it's about putting one foot in front of the other. And while we recognize that this recovery has been slower than we've wanted, and certainly than our residents have wanted, we're going to continue to show up, and we're going to continue to invest, and we're going to continue to partner with community to build back that hope.
That was St. Louis Mayor Cara Spencer in conversation with STLPR reporter Kate Grumke on Friday. We need to take a short break. When we return, Kate joins me live in studio alongside our colleague Kayvon Mansouri to dig into the mayor's claims about the city's response of last year's tornado and the reasons she laid out for why recovery work was delayed. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.
Welcome back. I'm Jonathan Ahl. Joining me now are our reporters at St. Louis Public Radio, Kayvon Mansouri and Kate Grumke, who have been spearheading the story that led to the interview that you heard with Mayor Cara Spencer. Now, I know both of you have spent a lot of time on the north side of the city. Kate, can we start with you? How do things look today when you drive through North St. Louis?
Yeah, so I don't know about today, but I do know about yesterday. So I went up and drove some path of the storm. And I think what really stood out to me is just how widespread the blue tarps are. And the reason it stands out to me is I, in a past life as a TV producer, went to Puerto Rico a year after Hurricane Maria. And the blue tarps on the homes then was really this symbol of how the government had not shown up for Puerto Rico. And driving through the north side yesterday, it's that same symbol. There's blue tarps everywhere. And I think the blue tarps are so indicative because it means somebody wanted to protect that house. Either they're living in it still or they were planning to come back to it. So when you see blue tarps, it's not that it was like a vacant or condemned home, which has been a big focus of coverage. It's a place that people wanted to come back to.
And there's different kinds of blue tarps because there's the ones that are still secured down, and then there's the ones that are flapping in the wind.
Yeah, so many now are not attached anymore. And we've had so many storms since the tornado, and we hear from residents all the time that it's just been getting worse and worse where they're trying to go back to.
Kayvon, what's your assessment when you spend time there?
I spent a lot of time in North City since the tornado, and I try to go up there. We're very close here, but I try to spend, some time there each week, talking with people. And it's really difficult. That's a neighborhood that has historically struggled because of man-made sort of problems, redlining, disinvestment, and to see sort of where things stand is a really it's sobering. We went up just last week to do some taping, and we noted on Newstead, I'm sorry. There's still sidewalks that are covered with bricks, and people are walking the streets trying to get around. And it's a tough situation, and people are really trying to kind of stick it out there and stay in these neighborhoods that they call home, and it's a difficult scene.
I'd like to dig into a little bit more with the Army Corps of Engineers meeting that was referenced in the interview, a meeting that Mayor Spencer was invited to and didn't go to. What else do we know about that may shed a little bit of light on that whole situation and what seems to be a big disconnect between what we found out and what the mayor was saying? Kate?
Yeah, so I can't reveal my sourcing on that part of this story, but I can say that on August 15th, when that meeting was supposed to happen, I actually was with Major General Peoples on a boat off of the Arch So the Army Corps does these low water inspection tours, and so that's why these top officials were in St. Louis. And so they were floating right off of the river, and that same day, Mayor Spencer was talking about how important it was for the Army Corps to come and do the debris removal. And so at this meeting, we saw emails for the planning of it, where Representative Colin Wellenkamp was setting it up. And he's saying that they're going to talk about St. Louis City priorities. And so the mayor's office is saying that we're mischaracterizing the meeting. It wasn't supposed to be about the tornado. I guess that would mean that it wasn't part of that list of priorities in their view. But Representative Colin Wellenkamp has confirmed to us that the tornado is expected to be on the agenda.
So it definitely, how much of this is optics? Because I think the mayor's argument is in part that had she been at that meeting, had she talked to Major General Peoples, that it would not have had any meaningful impact on the Army Corps of Engineers' decision to not provide the kind of aid the city was looking for, and that they had talked to other people with the Army Corps of Engineers. So is this at some level optics that it looks like the mayor did not take every chance allotted to her to be nose to nose with a decision maker and try to persuade them?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see any evidence of not taking an opportunity to ask for more for the North Side. So it may be the case that this wouldn't have moved the needle, but we'll never know that. And the request was ultimately denied.
A lot of the reporting was informed by Noel Pfeffer, who led the CDA and had a lot of concerns, ended up resigning from the city. Kayvon, why do you think Noel Pfeffer spoke out? The mayor seemed to want to characterize him as a disgruntled former employee. What can you tell us about your conversations with him and maybe why he was speaking out?
Right. Well, Noel kind of came to us through some other sources after seeing some of our past reporting on tornado response, and he just kind of told me that he had some things he wanted to get off his chest. Noel had worked under 4 mayors for a long time. He had been leading CDA for several years, and I think from what he came kind of prepared. He had started long before he knew we were even covering this in the way that Kate and I have been covering it for quite some time with our colleagues. He had been writing memos to himself and saving emails and just kind of documenting what he kind of characterized as these very strange meetings where there was a lot of what he felt like putting FEMA reimbursement over like sort of the humans that were going through the tornado recovery in North City. And that was a big thing for him. And he tried through, you can see in these emails, he's trying basically to move some funds around. Now, the mayor's office, their pushback basically is that, the mayor's official pushback, the mayor's office official pushback is basically like, he was putting forth a lot of plans that, were expensive, and the CDA was already struggling to spend the ARPA money that had been allotted before the tornado. He disagrees with that. I talked with Noel today, and he said, that's a mischaracterization of what actually happened, and most of the ARPA funds that were at CDA were spent by the time the tornado even hit. But I think, it's really interesting in the throughout reporting this, when we were talking to Noel, he had mentioned Nancy Hawes, Mayor Spencer's former interim chief of staff. And he was talking about these conversations. So I called Nancy, and I wasn't sure what sort of conversation we were going to have, but she was very candid with me. And she told me, a lot. And one of the things she said is like, one of the reasons Noel, she pushed back on a lot of the ideas that Noel was putting forth. But one of the things she told me very clearly is that like, yeah, he was putting together some ideas that might have worked, but we were going to fire him, and it was just a matter of time. So he wasn't on our team, and we weren't very interested in doing any of those ideas that he had. And Nancy was pretty forthcoming about that. And, so it's interesting.
Does that make his interest in speaking out suspect?
I don't know. He was never fired. He resigned. In November, I believe. And I think he didn't come to us right away. This is months later. And he was basically just saying like, hey, I try to do these things, and I think you guys should know about it. I mean, I do think that he was a little angry about how the city responded to the tornado. I won't deny that, but I think he also came with a lot of backup for that.
Yeah, he had a lot of documents to share. So I think if it had just been, I want to tell you my perspective, and hadn't been the level of emails and memos to himself that he had written, it would have been maybe a different.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd also like to talk about McKinsey and Company. This is the consulting group that apparently helped the city set up a new department free of charge. But that doesn't tell the whole story about McKinsey and Company. And Kate, that organization has a little bit of a controversial past.
Yeah, that's right. So there are a lot of criticisms of McKinsey and Company at kind of a national level. So national reporting from the New York Times especially has found that McKinsey, their reporting accuses McKinsey of kind of propping up authoritarian governments around the world. And then they also reached a settlement over their role in allegedly telling Purdue Pharma to turbocharge opioid sales during the opioid crisis. They never admitted wrongdoing in that situation. And then they also were involved in the recovery in Puerto Rico, which is not in our article, but there's been reporting on that as well. So they do have kind of a controversial track record. And we reached out to them for a comment on this story. They did not respond. But yeah, we see that they are among the many consultants that the mayor listed that they worked with in the months following the tornado.
And as far as we know, they have not a paid consultant?
Yeah, so the memo that we obtained showing what they were going to do said explicitly that it was free of charge. So we're not really sure why that was.
So FEMA, there is a lot of information about in your reporting about things that FEMA didn't do well, things that they did exactly the same way they've always done, that Donald Trump dramatically changed what FEMA looked like. Do we have a sense of how much FEMA is, for lack of a better phrase, to blame for the slow response in St. Louis?
Yes. Well, I don't know that I could put a number on it, but I think that it's undeniable that FEMA was in a different place than normal in the last year. So in June, President Trump was saying that he wanted to basically dismantle FEMA and send that responsibility to states and local governments. And as he was doing that, there was a mass exodus of employees at FEMA, including senior employees who I think often would answer questions like, hey, does this qualify? Which we saw the city asking a lot of questions like that. And then there was also a policy that the DHS administrator, Kristi Noem, had to sign off on any expense over $100,000, had to personally sign off on it. So those are all things that have been very well reported and I think did affect the response in the city. But then there's also this kind of element of, so when you have that situation going on, what does it mean for local governments? And we talked to Sarah Labowitz at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, who said, yeah, this is a terrible situation to be put in. It's kind of unprecedented, but what it means is you have to have a lot of creativity and leadership on a local level to find a way to recover.
I'd like to close by asking you, both of you, possibly an unfair question. If you could get one question answered that you haven't been able to get answered yet through your reporting, what would it be?
I definitely have an answer. I mean,
go for it.
What I want to think about really is just what is the future going to hold for these neighborhoods? And that couldn't even be answered right now. But that's really what's been on my mind is what is it going to look like in 5 years and 10 years? And as a native St. Louisan, I hope to still be here and see what that is. But there's a lot of ways it could go right now, I think.
I think I'll echo that. A few weekends ago, my wife and I went to the Mill Creek exhibit, the History Museum, which I really, really think people should go and see. And it's was really struck me. I remember leaving. My wife had commented that I was like, I seemed very distracted, and I was like, well, there's just so many parallels, right? Like what is going to happen here? Are we going to, we have this part of our city, and unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people like to dismiss North City. But the reality is this is a part of our city that is really done up right now and is really going through another storm. So the question is, what are we going to do to make sure that we don't lose another neighborhood, another historical neighborhood to another storm?
And you both have been working on this story for months. we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary, but both of you have plans to continue doing this reporting and following up a lot of these things, right?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. We've been told that the FEMA response alone can take 10 years. So I think it's possible we may be looking at this for a decade.
We'll be here.
Kate Grumke, Senior Environment and Data Reporter, and Kayvon Mansouri, Economic Development Reporter for St. Louis Public Radio. Thank you both. Thank you so much for your reporting and for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
To follow continuing coverage of tornado recovery in St. Louis over the past year, you can follow STLPR's Torn series on our website, stlpr.org/torn.
Today's episode was produced by Kate Grumke, Kayvon Mansouri, and Hiba Ahmed. It was recorded by Jonathan All, with audio editing by Emily Woodbury.
Production assistance from our audio engineer, Aaron Dorr.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.